Hi, this is Becky Spain, your instructor for business communication. Today we will be looking at Chapter 5 of Excellence in Business Communication, and the title of this chapter is Writing Business Messages. Now, if you'll remember, in Chapter 4, we looked at the planning stage of the three-stage writing process, which is to plan, write, and complete. We reviewed how to plan, and today in Chapter 5, we're going to look at the writing process. And as I mentioned when we looked at Chapter 4, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of the specifics of how do you actually write a business message. I want to make the point that I don't want you to get overwhelmed with all of the details of the do's and the don'ts. If you can review this chapter with me, and if you can just pick out a few things to improve in your writing, then I will feel like you have made good use of this chapter. And you're going to find the same thing in Chapter 6 also. There's just a ton of things that the authors of this book talk about you doing tools and methods. They're all very valuable, but to try to figure out how to utilize all of them in your writing over the next couple of weeks, you're going to get overwhelmed. So what I'd really like for you to do is to just learn through this process. So if you can find a few things that you can do to improve your writing as we go through each chapter, then at the end of the semester, you're going to have added a lot of skill to your writing, and you're going to be successful in what you're doing. So just wanted to make that editorial comment to make sure that you don't feel like every single item mentioned in all of these tools you're responsible for. Pick a few things out, apply them to your writing, and I think it'll be a win-win for you. Awesome. All right, so let's get to Chapter 5. Once again, I'll let you read through all the learning objectives as you review the chapter. We have 7 for this chapter, and let's start with learning objective number 1, which is to identify the 4 aspects of being sensitive to audience's needs when writing a business message. As I've mentioned several times already, and I'm sure I'll continue to say it throughout all of these lectures, but you need to start by adapting your message to your audience and making sure that you're expressing your ideas clearly and persuasively with your audience in mind. My guess is whenever you receive a message, whether it's a text message or an email that's coming into you, or if it's at work, the very first thing that you think of is, what's in it for me? What applies to me about this? Why do I need to read this message? If your intended audience members think that a message doesn't apply to them or it doesn't meet their needs, they won't be inclined to pay attention to it. And if they're not reading it, then you're not communicating. So you need to make sure that you are writing in such a way that makes the people who are receiving it want to read it. And one of the best ways to make sure that your audience is reading your messages is by adopting the you attitude. Now, we touched on this really briefly in Chapter 4, but I want to go into that a little bit deeper on this chapter. So the you attitude can be considered speaking and writing in terms of your audience's wishes, interests, hopes, and preferences. So, for example, one of the simplest ways that you can adopt the you attitude is by replacing words that you might use, such as I, mine, me, or even we and us, which I have a tendency to do, and replace them with you or yours, so that you're talking about the topic from your audience's perspective. So this example of applying the you attitude can be found on page 128. It's also, of course, in the PowerPoint. And I don't want to be reading these to you. I want you to actually take time to read through these so that you can see the difference in how the message is received by the reader. But you can see in this example that the author is replacing terms that referred to the company or to the person and referring instead to the audience, so from the audience's perspective. So in this example, I would say that the reader probably isn't too concerned that you're going to be swamped the rest of the week. However, on the rewrite, it tells me specifically as the reader what I need to do if I want to have this item carried out. So rather than saying, you know, if you want to get this done, we're going to be so swamped, you need to meet our needs. You're saying, hey, if you want to get this done for your purposes, this is what you need to do. So that's using the you attitude. Now, one of the things that I do want to make sure that we talk about is it's not always just changing from saying what I would want to saying what you want, because if it is something that might come across as impolite or accusatory, you want to avoid using the word you, as in this example. And again, you can find this on page 128 of your textbook. And as you are adapting your message to your audience, you also want to, of course, make sure that you're following appropriate business etiquette. You want to make sure that you are courteous to the members of your audience, that you control your emotions and communicate calmly even when it's a negative message, and that you are even more tactful in whenever you are writing messages, putting anything in writing. And we have some more examples for you. Once again, I do think that your reading through these is going to be the best way for you to see what we're talking about and to help you to gain tools that's going to help make you a better writer. So on the bottom of page 129, you're going to find these examples of what to write instead in regard to maintaining standards of etiquette. A really great skill to gain in your writing is to make sure that you're emphasizing the positive. So one of the things that I usually try to make sure that I'm teaching is when you are writing something, don't tell people what you can't do, tell them what you can do. And really pretty much anything that you could say in a negative tone, you can flip it to say in a positive tone. So let's say that you received a call from someone, you've got them on the phone, but you're not the right person to handle what they need, and you really need to transfer them to Frank down the hall. So you can be negative and say, I can't help you with that. Frank is the person that needs to handle that for you. Okay, that's negative. You've just told them what you can't do. Instead, flip that so that you're emphasizing the positive and say, I can help you with that by getting you to Frank. He's the expert on that. Let me transfer you to him. The exact same message, but you're just putting it into a positive light. And then the person who's on the other end, rather than getting frustrated because you just told them what you can't do, you're telling them instead what you can. And even when you are delivering negative news, there's difference between delivering negative news and being negative. So even when you have something that's negative that you need to talk with someone about, you can change that into a positive conversation by, instead of focusing on the negative, talking about ways that you can improve, or that the person can improve the process or improve the work that's being done, and avoid personal blows. You want to criticize constructively without personally attacking a person or without dwelling on the person's mistakes. You also want to look for ways to emphasize their benefit rather than your own. And make sure when you're delivering negative news that you are using euphemisms appropriately. You can be honest without being harsh, but make sure that you don't hide the facts. And the book also gives some really great examples to help us apply what this lesson is, or the difference in writing, which is on page 130 of your book. So take time to read through that. There's a couple of these here, and both of those are on page 130. So another skill when we are adopting our message to our audience is to remember to use bias-free language. So you need to make sure that when you're writing, you're looking for biases that are either gender or age biases, or even race and ethnicity, or disability biases. The book on page 131 gives a list of some biases that we often use in our language that we probably wouldn't even think about. And I have to admit that there were some words on this list that kind of caused me to check myself. I often say salesman and never really thought about the fact that that might be gender bias. When you start working in a position, or perhaps you're already in a position that you're working, you're going to find that your company is going to have norms for for the office, and you'll want to follow those. So they maybe have some words that they are very conscientious about, making sure that you're being free from bias in your language, and you want to make sure that you're up to speed on what those are and that you're following the examples of your peers and your superiors in applying those. So like my example of a salesman or a salesperson or a sales representative, that may be something that your company is very conscientious about or uses a different word for. So find out, make sure that you're paying attention to anything that might be bias in your language, and listen for what other people are saying, and then make sure that you are mirroring what your peers and your superiors are saying within your organization. So moving on to learning objective number 2. Explain how establishing your credibility and projecting your company's image are vital aspects of building strong relationships with your audience. I know we have touched on credibility in previous lectures, but we will touch on this again here. So your credibility is the measure of your believability based on how reliable you are and how much trust you evoke in others. So there's several ways that you can establish and increase your credibility. And this is important to you because audiences will respond to your messages heavily depending upon how much credibility they think that you have. Have you ever worked with someone that didn't have much credibility with you, and whenever you received messages from them or you were in communication with them in one way or another within your confines of your work, did you have a tendency to kind of water down what they were saying or ignore it or brush it off? So establishing your credibility within your organization is really critical so that the others that you are communicating with and working with will take you seriously. Credibility can actually take a long time to establish, and yet it's a very fragile thing because it can be wiped out by one single careless or foolish mistake. So we need to pay attention to our credibility and guard it. Elements of your credibility include honesty. You want to demonstrate honesty and integrity. You want to show that you have objectivity, that you can look at all sides of a situation, and that you can keep yourself from being emotionally involved in a situation so that it blinds you to being objective. Your audience needs to have confidence in you that whenever you send a message or say something, that you actually know what you're talking about, you have expertise or knowledge in that area, or you have done the research to gain that. You need to make sure that your word has value. If you say that you're going to get something done and you're going to get it done by a certain time, that you do that. You do it well, and you do it by the time that you said that you would have that delivered. Your comments need to be sincere. If you overemphasize things by saying, "Oh, you're the most fantastic writer in the entire world. I've never read anybody who writes as good as you." I guess the question would be, how sincere is that, and how much credibility does that establish? The person most likely knows that that's not true. So specifically state what it is about that person without being over the top in what you're saying. And then finally, self-confidence. If you lack faith in yourself, you're likely to communicate an uncertain attitude that undermines your own credibility. So make sure that you have self-confidence in the work that you do. And finally, you need to project your company's image. So you need to project the proper image for your company by subordinating your own views and personality if necessary, and mastering your company's style. Observe more experienced colleagues in the organization to see how they communicate, emulate that, and never hesitate to ask for editorial help. All right, learning objective number 3, explain how to achieve a tone that is conversational but businesslike, explain the value of using plain language, and define the active and passive voice. So let's move through these items. First of all, creating a conversational tone. So style is the way that words are used to achieve a certain tone. That's the impression made by your words. Most business messages aim for a conversational style that is warm but is still businesslike. Though there may be times that your business writing calls you to be very formal or maybe very informal, for the most part you want to kind of aim in the middle to that warm conversational tone that will help you to communicate with those that you work with on a daily basis. And I know I've mentioned this before also, but don't confuse texting and writing. Sometimes in our texting we are a little bit more lax in how we create sentences and even using abbreviations and punctuation, but in business writing, never ever be lax in those areas. You want to avoid stale and obsolete language. Most companies nowadays are staying away from phrases like please find attached or please be advised that. Make sure that your messages aren't preachy or bragging. You should never brag about your work or your level of knowledge. And be careful with intimacy and humor. Generally speaking, you need to avoid sharing personal details with other professionals that you're working with in your organization. And also be careful with humor. That can often backfire because what one person finds funny, another person may find offensive, and it's difficult to determine how somebody might take that. Also control your tone and your style by using plain language. So plain language is a way of presenting information in a simple, unadorned style that your audience can easily grasp without struggling through specialized or technical language. Plain language can make companies more productive and more profitable simply because people spend less time trying to figure out the message that might be confusing or might not be written in a way that meets their needs. Plain language also helps people who don't have, if you're writing in English, English is a first language, help them to understand your message more easily. Another way to control your tone and your style in your writing is to avoid the passive voice and select using an active voice. If you are sending your work through like Word, it will normally tell you when you're using a passive voice, which is very helpful. And it gives you an opportunity to look to see if you need to revise what you've written. But a passive voice is usually dull and indirect, where active voice is more lively and direct. There's a great chart on page 138 of your book. Take a minute and read over that. It'll give you some examples of what is a passive voice and an active voice and help you to understand the concept of using an active voice and how that can actually strengthen your writing. However, with most writing rules, there's also a time when the passive voice is going to be the better choice and can actually help you to focus your message on your audience. So in the examples shared here, the active voice is a little bit more accusatory when you're saying you lost the shipment. So the more diplomatic thing to do in this situation would be to choose the passive voice, which would be the shipment was lost. Then that way you can move forward with what do we do next rather than being accusatory. Learning objective number 4 is describe how to select words that are both correct and effective. In looking at choosing words, we have finally moved to the second point under our second step of writing, and that is composing our message. So as you begin to write your first draft, go ahead and allow your creativity to flow. Don't try to write everything perfectly the first time because you're going to have opportunities to go through and edit and revise. So don't worry about trying to get everything perfect the first time. As you start to write your draft, you may find that the introduction or the first paragraph is the hardest part to write. So if you get a block on that and you can't figure out what would be a really strong opening paragraph or sentence, go ahead and move to another part. You don't necessarily have to write your message in complete order, so move to a part that's easier to write, perhaps the body. You may find that this is easier to write that part of it and your conclusion and then come back and write your introduction, that you might actually come to mind what you want to say. I also often find that as I start writing and then I look at what I've written, I've actually started with the body and then I wrote the intro, so then as I go back and review and revise, I can take out the part that actually is the introduction and put that at the beginning. So you'll have lots of opportunities to move things around once you get your thoughts and your points on the paper. As you create and refine your messages, learn to view your writing at 3 levels. You want to look at strong words, and then you want to look at effective sentences, and then you want to look at coherent paragraphs. So let's begin by looking at choosing strong words. As you choose your words, make sure that you don't have grammatical or usage errors, as that will cause you to lose credibility with your audience. Poor grammar implies to your audience that you're uninformed and may cause your audience to not trust what you have to say. It can also imply that you don't respect your audience enough to take the time to write things grammatically correct. Selecting and using words effectively is often more challenging than using words correctly because it's a matter of judgment and expertise. The more you read, the better you're going to get at expanding your vocabulary and therefore giving you more options when it comes time to choosing words in your own writing. So if you're not an avid reader and you want to become a better writer, reading is going to be a critical part of becoming a better writer. So consider increasing what you're reading so that you can learn more broadly about the use of words and how people write, and you can emulate that in your own writing. When you are composing your message, you want to make sure that you are balancing the abstract and concrete words. So concrete words are often more effective than abstract words because they are more precise. But that isn't always the case, as in pretty much all of writing rules. So you need to blend abstract terms with concrete ones to be as effective as possible. A word is abstract if it's expressing a concept, a quality, or a characteristic, where it's concrete if it's standing for something that you can touch, see, or visualize. In composing your message, you also want to find words that communicate well. Avoid cliches or buzzwords, and be careful about using jargon. There's actually a table on page 141 of your textbook that gives some great examples for how to find powerful words, and then also lists some cliches and buzzwords that you want to make sure that you're avoiding. This PowerPoint also provides a couple of slides that give you some great examples of ways to weed out obsolete phrases, such as instead of saying we are in receipt of, just simply say we received. And this is an abbreviated slide of the chart that I just referred to on page 141. All right, so take time to review that. Learning objective number 5. Define the 4 types of sentences and explain how sentence style affects emphasis within a message. To make every sentence that you write count, you need to arrange your chosen words carefully, and you need to select the optimum style of sentence. So there are 4 different types of sentences. Let's begin by reviewing a simple sentence structure. A simple sentence has one main clause. It has a single subject and a single predicate. So an example is profits increased in the last year, period. That's a simple sentence. A compound sentence has 2 main clauses, and they're joined by a conjunction. Now, a conjunction are words such as and, but, or, and an example is wage rates have declined by 5% and employee turnover has been high. So basically 2 simple sentences that are just joined by a conjunction. Now, the reason that we're going through this is because you want to make sure that your writing has a variety of different types of sentences so that it doesn't lose the reader or bore the reader. So let's look at the 3rd and 4th type of sentence. The 3rd type is a complex sentence, which has one main clause and a dependent clause. An example of a complex sentence is, although you may question Gerald's conclusions, you must admit that his research is thorough. And the 4th type of sentence is compound complex, which has two main clauses and at least one subordinate clause. So once again, here is an example of a compound complex sentence. Profits increased 35% in the last year, so although the company faces long-term challenges, I agree that its short-term prospects look quite positive. So when choosing which type of sentence you want to use, you need to look at the idea that you want to express. If you have two ideas of equal importance, you can express them as two simple sentences or as a compound sentence. However, if one of the ideas is less important than the other, place it as a dependent clause to form a complex sentence. Once again, your book has some examples on page 142 and 143 that you can read through to help you to better understand this idea of the different types of sentences and how you can use them. But the main point here is that by varying your sentence structures, you're going to have a more interesting read for your audience. So using sentence style to emphasize key thoughts. So you can emphasize key ideas through sentence style by describing an important element with more detail, or by adding a separate short sentence to augment the thought. You can also make a thought the subject of a sentence, and you can place the key idea either at the beginning or at the end of the sentence. And again, I will point you to examples in your book on page 143 and 144 that will help you to better understand these concepts and help you to learn how to apply them in your writing. All right, and learning objective number 6, define 3 key elements of a paragraph and list 5 ways to develop unified coherent paragraphs. Okay, so we've looked at word choice and we've looked at sentence styles, and now we're going to look at paragraphs. So paragraphs organize your sentences related to the same general topic. Your reader is going to expect each paragraph to be unified and focused on a single unit of thought, as well as being coherent and presenting ideas in a logical, connected way. So all of the information about one unified thought should be in one paragraph. As you move to another thought, you need to move to another paragraph. Now, I will tell you that in grading papers, one of the biggest mistakes that I see is long run-on paragraphs. It's going to be easier for your reader if you divide your paragraphs up into shorter, more readable, more digestible pieces of information, but make sure that you do have a complete paragraph each time that you are writing a paragraph and moving to the next one. So a paragraph is made up of several elements. It has a topic sentence, it has supporting sentences, and it has transition. Now, for your topic sentence, that would include the topic. It gives the reader a summary of the general idea that's going to be covered in the rest of the paragraph and reminds the audience of the purpose of each paragraph. Now, your support sentences are going to just explain, justify, or extend the topic sentence. They're more specific than your topic sentence, and they provide additional pieces of evidence to demonstrate the main thought. And then the last part of your paragraph is the transition, which is the word or phrases that tie your ideas together by showing how one thought is related to another and helps your reader understand the connections that you're trying to make. It smooths out your writing and also helps then to connect you to the next paragraph that you're going to write. So each paragraph should have topic sentences, support sentences, and then transition to the next paragraph. In choosing the best way to develop your paragraphs, there are 5 common approaches. These are outlined on page 147 in a table at the bottom of your page. This table also provides some examples to help you to understand what these different techniques are. So if you'll review that on page 147, one point that I will make is that in practice you'll occasionally combine 2 or more methods of development into a single paragraph. So that just gives you some choices. In addition to these different 5 different approaches, you can also work to combine the different approaches to get the effect that you want. All right, and learning objective number 7, which is to list 5 techniques for writing effective messages for mobile readers. So making your mobile a message more effective. You want to remember that reading is often more difficult on small screen, and your user's ability to comprehend what they read on a mobile device is usually lower than it is on large screens because it is a small screen. So some things that you can do to help your mobile reader better understand the information is to use linear organization of your information. So to simplify reading on a mobile screen, organize with a linear flow from the top to the bottom of the message or top to the bottom of the article. The second tip is to prioritize your information. Since the small screen makes it difficult for a reader to scan the page to find the information that they want, you need to put the most important information first. The third tip is to write shorter and more focused messages on your document. Though we've talked about the fact that in today's microwave world where we want everything quick, we have very short attention spans, and when you're reading on a mobile device, it seems to be amplified, and you need to get through with whatever your message is even more quickly than you do in other mediums or other channels, because mobile users are looking for specific information and they're wanting to move along quickly. The fourth technique is to use shorter subject lines and headings, which falls along those same lines, and then finally to compose shorter paragraphs, which once again just supports that same thought. You need to get the main points out there quickly and as focused as possible, because mobile readers are not going to take the time to read through massive amount of information, and it's more difficult to scan. So that concludes our lecture on Chapter 5, and I will see you on Chapter 6 when we look at the third step of the writing process, which is completing your message.